Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. The last 3 episodes have been on trauma. The impact that trauma, the parental relationship, the parental absenteeism, parental separation has on the individual and the children. Both parents are affected by the separation. As much as we would like to reject the concept that someone wronged me and I am still hurt, I'm still traumatized by the separation, you know, that's something that we're not always that willing to acknowledge. That's just the way it is. You hurt me. We're in the situation of parting ways and me having to start over and me having to go through all the theatrics of visitation and support and custody, all those things. All these things could have been avoided had you not done, or had you done certain things. That's not an easy pill to swallow for many of us. So we drain ourselves, being so relentless in our pursuit of making the other pay, and in all essence we are really the ones paying. Think about it. We're the ones who go through all the suffering while the other person has moved on in many ways with their lives. That's an issue for us as well, because it seems like they're moving on. But just because I'm taking steps to start anew does not necessarily mean that I have moved on. It doesn't necessarily mean that. And a lot of times what happens is we get stuck right there because we see that person with another, because we see that person doing things now that they had not done then. Not even things as big as, oh, they're going out clubbing, they're hanging out with their girlfriends, but something as simple as maybe they're going to their place of religious service. Maybe they're line dancing. Maybe they're taking some educational classes. Maybe they're just doing something to begin the healing process for themselves, but because they're not reacting in the way that we think they should about the separation, we make ourselves angrier because we want them to suffer. And some will say, well, Sabir, that's not true in my case. I'm glad they're moving on, so now I can move on. But have you really moved on? Are you or are you not doing the same thing that they're doing? See, we always look at the end and how it ended as opposed to what has ended. What has ended? There's an end. And we don't want to acknowledge the fact that this whole big thing ended. See, we make it a small thing now because we have reduced it to the size of a conflict, a difficulty, a stumbling block. Or in many cases, it was something that was already there that you willfully turned a blind eye to. And now you want to blame the other person for doing that which they have always done in terms of what you find displeasing, and now you want to make them wrong for being who they were in the beginning. See, there's a lot to this when we talk about healing, because now you have to begin to take ownership for what you are feeling right now. You can't blame the other person. Yes, I understand. There's some hurt, there's some sorrow, there's some grief involved in the separation. I got that. I I got all of that. But that's something that you need to bear in mind when and if the time comes for you to be faced with that person again. Do you let them back in, knowing what you know now? Feeling what you have felt now. Do you let them back in? Because if you're done, be done. And we're going to talk about that in a later segment. But you have to be done with the relationship before any level of healing can begin. And if you're not finished, you need to say that you're not finished. And you don't need to say it to the other person, you need to say it to yourself. Because you need to get finished with that relationship if that other person is done with it. You need to get finished with it. See, now this is where it becomes your issue. This is where it becomes your issue. When you're the one who's not done. And you want them to still be undone with it as well. But they're done. See my new coffee mug? I was watching, I forget what one of the sitcoms the other night, and the young lady had this humongous coffee mug. And I looked and I told Zahira, I said, look at the cup, I want one of those. And she said, we have one. And then here it was, this big humongous mug that she bought out that was sitting up in the closet in one of the cabinets for some time. And it's just been sitting there up, you know. We've been using the other mugs, but I saw that one, so here now I have mine too. I love coffee. I say this all the time at every show, especially a freshly ground cup of coffee. You have to buy the beans. You have to buy a grinder and grind your own beans every morning. The grinders only cost a few dollars. They really do. It's a few dollars, but it's the best investment that we've made in getting coffee. So we have to be finished with the relationship. And if we're not finished with the relationship, we have to talk ourselves to the end with someone who's trustworthy, even if it means going to therapy. We have to talk ourselves to the end. We have to move to an end. We have to bring closure to this circumstance. Because if we don't, it will taunt us. It will torture us. It will make us miserable. For a long time. Sometimes even into a new relationship. So the ability or lack thereof rests solely on the individual. This is not a group exercise. This is not a couple's event. This is an individual process. It's an individual process. And everyone, as I stated in the previous show about trauma, everyone needs to be able to go at their pace. The problem is some don't even move to the next step. You have to take steps toward freedom, towards personal freedom. Because once obtaining personal freedom, the rest doesn't even matter. But you have to make some effort. You have to take some advances towards being free from the pain and the misery that will envelope you after separation, regardless again of how bad, how negative, how serious the end was. You have to learn how to forgive. And people will rationalize and justify what you don't forgive. Remembering one thing, this is very important for everybody to get. Forgiveness is not for the other person. Forgiveness is for you. You. It is not for the other person. And oftentimes we get caught up in, I'll never forgive him for what he did to me. No, you'll never forget what he or what she did to you. You'll never forget it. Because there was some level of trauma attached to the incident or incidents. But you have to forgive. You have to forgive. I forgive you for what you have done, based on the fact, the realization that human beings are not perfect. I make mistakes. I've made mistakes. I've done things to bring harm to other people. I will on any given day do something to bring harm to another person. And I need to ask them for forgiveness. I need to forgive myself. Oftentimes we don't even forgive ourselves, let alone forgiving the other person. So forgiveness is a gift to yourself. It is not something you do for the other person. It is not complicated. It is quite simple. Simply identify the situation to be forgiven and ask yourself, am I willing to waste my energy any further on this matter? You have to ask yourself that question. Is all that you're experiencing every single day, the stress, the anger, the resentment, the way that those emotions impede you from enjoying daily living, is it worth that? The relationships all around you are now being impacted by this consumption because you're not willing to let it go. And people around you are telling you, let it go, move on. He's moved on, she's moved on. Why are you yelling and screaming at me? Why are you getting angry at me? Because you've been consumed by those emotions. Everybody is telling you that. Is that what you want? Is that making that other person pay for what happened between the two of you? Or are you making everybody around you pay for a decision that you made? You made the decision to involve yourself in that relationship. Good, bad, or indifferent. Good, bad, or indifferent. You made that decision. You have to be the one to make the decision to move on. And you have to start with forgiving that person for what they've done. Do you know how many times I have had to start my life over again? Each time I parted ways from a marriage, I took a loss. Every single time. Every time. And I didn't just take minimal losses. I took substantial losses, to include having to relocate. Do you know what that feels like? Do you? Do you know what it feels like to have to build and rebuild and rebuild? All because of decisions. I made decisions to enter into these marriages. Good, bad, or indifferent is not even the issue here. The fact remains that each time I left something that I had established for my foundation of living. I had to walk away from it. And I say I had to walk away from it because, again, this is about freedom. This is about personal freedom. I had to walk away. Each time I've had to walk away. And I've had to start over again. And it's left me gun shy. It's left me damaged, but not bitter. Hurt, but not bitter. But not bitter. So yes, it can be devastating. Because when you look at the relationship being over, when you look at the hopes, dreams, and aspirations that you had about the marriage and about where you saw things going and about where you thought things could go, that's where you saw it. The other person didn't necessarily have to see it from that perspective because they saw it from their own perspective. And even though they may have verbalized it much like that which you did, they sounded similar. They sounded similar. But they look different. And they look different because of the individual conditioning. Based on an individual's conditioning, it will be based on how they interpret that same thought that you had. They interpret it differently. The other day in class, I gave the guys an example. I gave a word, and I asked for them to respond to the word with one other word to define the word which was given. So I gave the word heat, H-E-A-T. And I went around the room and I got 10 different responses to the word heat. To include myself, I had a different definition, a one-word definition response to the word heat. Some used temperature, some used law enforcement, the police, a gun. There were varying responses to that one word. So when you say love and I say love, are we meaning the same thing? We can probably almost define it similarly, but how does it present in your life and how does it present in my life? We really don't know that. We really don't know that. So it's really, it's really important to understand how we all internalize life differently, but most importantly, we also have to look at gender, because males and females interpret and internalize things differently as well. I internalize love in a manner based on my conditioning as a child. Depending on what my environment was like as a child will dictate pretty much my relationships with others as a teen and into adulthood. Depending on how long my conditioning is as a child, how consistent that the environment is, will also determine on my foundation for how I see the world. For how I see the world. If I can't trust my parents, if I'm not open and I don't have a positive level of communication with my parents, well, my male and female relationships are being defined by that. If I'm raised by a woman who is domineering, who is aggressive, who is harsh, who is bitter themselves, and who transfers that to me, how am I going to perceive that same conduct coming from a female, another female outside of my mother? Now, we hold our parents in a certain regard. I hold my mother in high regard. Therefore, any woman who projects that same image, I'm not going to take it from, because you're not my mother. First thing comes to mind. You're not my mother. My mother was the only one that had the authority to address me in that manner, to treat me in that manner. And even though I didn't like it, the bottom line on it is I'm not going to allow another woman to enter into my life and speak to me in that manner. So you see the concept here. You see the analogy, and look at your relationships today with others and ask yourself what kind of impact you're having on the other person, because we influence one another. We condition one another in these relationships. You know, you say to some people, y'all been together so long, you look alike. Well, it's a fact. It's a fact to the other person. But we see each other, we don't look like each other. But people begin to see us as one. Even though we don't feel that way with one another. Or even if we do feel that way, even if we do think that we are a united front, people see us all the time and they begin to, it's like their vision begins to merge because they see the unification between us. They see the love between us. And that's what we need to see, even in a bitter end. Even in a bitter end. Because that's part of our vow. Our vow is till death do us part. And the death doesn't always have to be a physical death. We can spiritually detach from one another. And we miss that part. We miss that part. We miss the fact that we have not outgrown each other, but it had already been established from the beginning that we were going in different directions, and we knew that. But a lot of times we hope that this other person would begin to mature or blossom or develop in that particular area of their life, but they haven't. Because why? They haven't sought to do so. It wasn't their choice. It's what you desired for them. See, this whole forgiveness thing gets really deep because you have to take an in-depth look at your own conditioning. Not the situation, but your own conditioning. You have to see how you have been conditioned to be unrealistic in your expectations of others. Your unrealistic expectations of others. I will fail you as a human being. I will fail you. Didn't say that I would, do raunchy, foul things to you. Didn't say any of those things. I'm a human being. I am created flawed. Therefore, somewhere along the line, I will fail you. Even if it's to not agree with something that you want me to agree with. I will fail you. We have to see that reality in humanity. In humanity. I may forget something that you felt as though I should remember. I'm a forgetful person. I can tell you that in a minute. I have so much going on in my life, things slip by me. So if you know that, what should you do to help? See, this is about helping. If you know I'm forgetful, get Post-it notes. They only cost $1 and something cents from the office store, from Walmart. Get some of those and put sticky notes up so I can remember. Why expect me to remember when you know how I forget things? And then get angry or upset or disappointed because I forgot something. You set yourself up. But then you want to make me the bad guy. See where this is going? So when we talk about forgiveness, we have to look at when we don't forgive, the situation now owns us. So we have allowed a situation to now occupy our life. Now this situation dictates everything we do for the rest of our lives. So somewhere along the line, I have lost the radio signal. Don't know why, but we're going to keep moving on with the show, and I'll remedy that after the taping here. And I apologize for all the listeners who are maybe calling in or listening in live to the show. It's electronics. Forgive me, please. But we need to begin to take a realistic look at what happens to us when we don't forgive others. Because nothing is happening for real to the other person. Nothing. Nothing. And even when you hear people say, well, I need for you to forgive me in order for me to move on, that's not true. I don't need you to forgive me. I need to forgive myself. I need to forgive you for not forgiving me. And sometimes people just, again, you want to play the role of the victim. That's what you're actually doing. You're taking on the role of a victim. You're saying that if this person does not forgive you, then you will be unforgiving of them for not forgiving you. When you see how it just goes back and forth? So if I don't forgive you, that means what? You're going to take your life? You're going to hurt yourself? You're going to stay in the condition that you are? Being non-productive? Being resistant to the rest of the world's attempts at trying to uplift you and move you forward? What? And who are you hurting when you do that? Who are you really hurting when you do that? You're not hurting me. So I'm not going to forgive you because I'm not ready to. So you can just mosey on out the door and take your little pity party along with you, because I'm not going to own that. I'm not going to own that. And when people take that position, a lot of times you'll find that the relationship was guided by the same principles. It was all based on what the other person was expected to do in order for you to be whole as a person. See how simple this really is, but see how complicated we often make it? We make this complicated because all I need to do is to say to you that I forgive you. You had the right to be who you are. You have the right to your flaws. You have the right. I may not have liked what you did. Matter of fact, I didn't like what you did. I made the choice to not accept that from you. Or I understand your point. I understand your position. I don't like being with me either. It's a struggle for me to deal with a whole lot of things that have transpired in my life. You made me realize how me not working on that particular area of my life has impacted our marriage. I got that. I'm not happy about it, but I understand. But I understand. People have the right to be who they are. People have the right to be where they are. Once we begin to realize that where that person is at in their lives and how it's affecting our relationship, we're responsible to make a conscious decision to get out of that relationship. And yes, I understand it's more easier said than done. Trust me, I know from experience. Because we're always trying to make it go away. We're always trying to make it better. We're always hoping. We're always believing that the situation is going to get better. I can love it away. I can love them into a better condition. No, you can't. No, you can't. Don't ever believe that. When a person decides to hold on to unhealthy conditions, that's not going to be healthy for you. That's not going to be a healthy outcome to the relationship. Cut and dry. It is not going to be a healthy forming relationship between the two of you. If the person is actually legitimately doing some work on that area and you're aware of that before the relationship, maybe you need to give them time to develop an outcome, as opposed to jumping right in and trying to help them along and then reminding them along the way where they said they were working on it, but because they're not working on it at your pace, now it's an issue. So the list goes on and on and on. But and just because you remember this, just because you decide to forgive a person doesn't mean that you have to stay in a relationship. No. And that's where a lot of confusion lies as well. And that's a whole nother discussion. But if I make a conscious decision to forgive you for your conduct during the course of our relationship, during the course of our marriage, that does not obligate me to remain in a relationship. Not at all. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes we apologize to one another, or one of us apologizes, and think now because we have apologized or either accepted the apology that now we keep moving on like business as usual. No. I'll forgive you for what you did, didn't do, said, didn't say. I'll forgive you. But this doesn't work for me. Staying in a relationship doesn't work for me. No, I'm not holding it over your head. It does not. This relationship is not going to work. It's not going to go any further than where it has. And not because of the incident, but because of things that transpired through the course of the relationship that were red flags anyway, that pretty much showed me. And I made a choice to turn a blind eye to it, but you had already shown me where these things were going to go. But I have a choice. The bottom line, I have a choice to stay or go. That's my choice. I had that choice from the time I walked into this relationship to the time I walk out of it. I have the right to be who I am. They have the right to be who they are. I have the right to not want to be a part of it, as well as they do too. So that's today's show on forgiveness. And again, I apologize to all of my faithful listeners, new listeners. I don't know what happened today, what was happening with my switchboard today at Blog Talk Radio, but we're going to remedy that issue. But guess what? I'm going to videotape it as I've been doing all the shows, so if there's ever a problem, we've got a backup. Remember, you have the backup. When you don't have a backup, you're setting yourself up. Again, thank you for joining me at Spot. Peace. God bless.